signings once we had them on the books. For example, Robbie Keane, a quality player who barely got a run out in the side.
Would you say David O'Leary was a naive manager? You know, he always used to make a big play of his naivety. I'm a young manager, I've got a young team, my babies, all that used to bore us to tears.
Ad nauseum, yes.
Ad nauseum, yes. Would you say he was a naive manager?
Well, I would say he was a manager who, as I've said, seemed to be tactically unaware. And certainly when frozen in the headlights of a game going against him, and I'd cite Newcastle when we lost 4-3 towards the end of 2001 as probably the start of the end. 3-1 up, no substitutions, and we know what happened after that.
Well, me here is going to put to you, I know he is, but his actual record is quite good. 3rd, 4th, 5th, you're up there at the top of the table under David O'Leary. If he was such a poor manager, how did he achieve that? Yes,
I think, without wishing to sort of prejudice myself when I'm nailed by the defence, if you look at the figures, David was there 4.5 years. In that time, I think the calendar year 2001, if you'd have stapled the second half of that season and the first half of the following season together, would have won the Premiership by a mile. Other than that, it was pretty ghastly.
Okay. Well, my next exhibit is a book written by David O'Leary immediately after the Bowyer-Woodgate hearing. The argument is that that book and other actions through that, David O'Leary lost the dressing room. That's all said. Would you agree with that?
I'd certainly agree with that. It's interesting, the timing as well. It was on or about the time we spent the final 21 million on Fowler and Johnson.
Yes.
And it was interesting that at about that time, the collapse in form in the second half of last season began.
Yes. Would you have, I mean, if you were the Leeds United manager at the time of the Bowyer-Woodgate affair, would you have handled it differently from David O'Leary? Do you think he was too soft on his players, or what?
It's difficult for me to comment because I wasn't in the change room, but it seems to suggest so.
Yes.
The book, which in truth I admit I didn't even bother to read, I was so disgusted at its timing and sadly its title, seemed opportunistic, money-grabbing, badly timed, and again, as I say, with an appalling title. The logic behind that eludes me. Even if he wasn't a good tactician on the pitch, it's just common sense.
Mr. Barkley, I just have to stop you for that particular moment. If you stay there, please, Mr. Kellner, thank you for that. May I ask Mihir Bose to continue the defence, please?
Mr. Parkinson, do you remember a Leeds manager called George Graham? Tell me, what was his record and how many European Champions League did he take you to? How many exciting matches? Name me one exciting match he produced for Leeds. Can you name me one?
I accept entirely there wasn't many.
He was a manager, right? Have I forgotten that history?
Yes, he was indeed a manager, right. And in the main it was fairly tedious. By the same
and you loved him, right?
Pardon?
You loved him. Leeds loved him, George Graham, right? They'd rather bring George Graham back.
Well,
I mean, David O'Leary was so bad, right?
Yes, I think you can maybe ask the audience for comments on how in love with George Graham they were. But the fact of the matter is, we spent nearly £100 million on players, a not dissimilar figure to Chelsea. Chelsea appear to be getting it right. They're top of the table at the moment. And notwithstanding the excellent result Eddie and the team got against them on Saturday, they look like they're going to make that money pay off. We didn't.
Yeah, well,
George Graham didn't spend.
There were two seasons Chelsea didn't qualify for the Champions League. You talk about O'Leary's record in the transfer market. I seem to remember he bought a player called Rio Ferdinand,
yes, he did,
for 18 million and sold him for just under 30. He bought Robbie Keane and made a big profit on him. So these are not bad transfer signings then. Yeah, how does he become a bad businessman then?
Sure. Rather than pick up the points about how much Keane was bought and sold for, I take the point about it. If you look at Ferdinand, admittedly we made money on Ferdinand, the only one we did. It's interesting, of course, that Ferdinand was the first one out of the door, a mercenary.
That's in your opinion, of course.
In my opinion, yes. Certainly.
Can I put
this... the opinion of somebody, of course, who now plays for Manchester United. Leeds fans don't like Man United. We'll make that point, I think.
I mean, isn't it a point that David O'Leary, a young coach who turned down the offer of going to Tottenham Hotspur, stayed at Leeds, proved himself quite a good manager, and after all these purchases and sales were sanctioned by the board. He didn't do a bad job. 4th, 3rd, 4th, 5th. In 4 years of managership, most managers, apart from perhaps Alex Ferguson, would say that's a very good record.
Having spent nearly £100 million on players.
No, but nevertheless, I mean, you have to buy players since you're not producing players. And that's a long-term project.
Well, we did actually produce players as well. My argument is that with the money available to him, the vast resources in the context of the current transfer market, he didn't use it very well.
I wonder whether it might be worth just actually looking at David O'Leary's record, which is very much part of Mr. Bose's defence. If you have a look, you can see it's impressive on paper. 4th, 3rd, 4th and 5th. And that's basically, Mr. Bose, your argument that he wasn't as bad as people paint.
Absolutely, and he missed once by 1 point qualifying for the Champions League. If you look at Ranieri's record, he's doing well now, but he missed out twice on Champions League. I mean, these are very marginal things. I think the point is you are expressing an emotional, frustrated fan's response to the fact that here was quite a good young manager who probably should not have been sacked, made mistakes, and that is why you're blaming the entire blame on him.
And you've got 10 seconds, Mr. Parkinson, to add.
Yeah, sure. I think the proof of the pudding's in the eating. If you ask again the panel 6 months before David O'Leary was dismissed, I think most of them would privately have said he should have gone.
Mr. Parkinson, thank you very much indeed. Mr. Bose, thank you very much indeed for the time being. Mr. Kellner, thank you.
Yeah, I would just comment on that we'll see where Aston Villa finish up this season to see how good David O'Leary is without money. I'd like to call my final witness. My final argument tonight is against the players. And I'm going to present another exhibit here, which is tickets for the Majestic nightclub in Leeds. Now, I maintain that by their behaviour off the park and their lamentable performance on it, the Leeds United players must accept their share of responsibility for the mess that is Leeds United before last weekend and the weekend before. I call my last witness Luke Wileman. Luke is the voice of BBC Radio Leeds. His first day at work was the day that Terry Venables joined as manager. Luke, we've heard a lot about the mistakes made by David O'Leary, the mistakes made by Peter Ridsdale and others, but surely the players, the overpaid, overpampered players, have to take their responsibility as well.
There is no doubt that the players underperformed when Terry Venables was manager. If you look at the game at the end of the season when Terry Venables had already gone away at Arsenal that they finally produced and won to keep Leeds in the Premiership, there was still something like 8 out of the starting 11 players that had been involved in the Champions League semi-final. So yes, the point can be made that there were players there of very good quality, international players who weren't performing in the Premiership at that stage.
Now, and the off-field behaviour, which we've referred to via the tickets to the Majestic nightclub, that was completely unprofessional, was it not? On the part of quite a few of the players.
Yes, although that is something that happens throughout football. I don't think you could say that was just Leeds United players. Premiership players, footballers from across the country go out. I can't say that there's too much wrong with that. In fact, I would say that the players have to relax. It's just when they take it to excess that causes a problem, particularly in a city where everyone knows all the Leeds United players. They can't get away with it as they would do in London.
No, it is a problem with management. You have to have strong management to make sure that players relax in an appropriate way. I mean, I would submit that, say, people like Alex Ferguson, he's quite good at doing that, whereas the management that we've already heard about at Leeds United wasn't.
Yes, but I would also say that some of the Leeds United players, when you're blaming them for underperforming, you have to also look at the people who were in charge of them. You've already mentioned